Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, lords and ladies,
Mm.
boys and girls. Um, I am John Atack. For anybody who doesn't know that, I'm the guy that's lost 40 subscribers for saying he doesn't like Donald Trump, and I'd like to say that that represents 0.5% of my subscribers, but I still don't like him, and that's all there is to it. Not very keen on Democrats either, generally, but I think Kamala's quite nice, really. All in all. But anyway, that's got nothing to do with what we're doing. That was just to get rid of anybody else that doesn't want me to say anything unpleasant about Donald Trump. This is my dear friend, Hoyt Richards. How are you today, Hoyt?
Oh, it's good to see you, John.
Always.
The sun's finally coming up. It's getting that time of year where it's dark when I wake up, and now it's nice to have the sun starting to peek in through the blinds here. So,
Yeah, and
I can't
occasionally you get a cool day in Los Angeles as well.
exactly. Actually, that's one of the things I like about LA. Usually, it cools down at night and carries through into the morning, and then
Mm.
it's quite balmy during the day. But yeah, I mean, sometimes actually October. The beginning of October is probably the hottest month of the year sometimes. I don't know
I've
why.
been there in October when it was
Our
sort of
summer.
100 degrees and the blacktop was sticking to my shoes. Yeah, it's
Oh
like
yeah. It
freaky.
seems like the summer comes later now. Who
Mm.
knows? But
There is no climate
it's,
change, though.
as always, great to see you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It's always a pleasure. And
yeah,
um, so you've ventured the topic today of magical thinking. Would you like
yeah.
to set us going on that?
Yeah. No, I think that would I mean it's one of the things I look back on my whole cultic journey. It played a really powerful role. Um, yeah, in the sense that when I first met the cult leader, Freddie von Mears, really Freddie Myers from Brooklyn, but when I met him, he was Freddie von Mears, and he was a kind of acclaimed, if you want to use that term, astrologer. And
Mm.
I think astrology is one of those topics that kind of fall into this, umbrella of magical thinking.
And
Uh,
how?
and that's not to say there may be something to astrology, and I've never really looked at it in anything in depth, but I can certainly say the way it was kind of treated in within our group was he could do a life reading for you, and that would then determine kind of um, a kind of blueprint for you to then how to live your life. Like, what were your strengths? What were your weaknesses? What were, in this incarnation, you coming to Earth, like this reincarnation was a huge part of this idea. And how would that play out in your life? And he was immediately putting himself in the position of someone that was holding this secret knowledge that he could offer to others. And then there was an immediate kind of sense of debt that you felt towards him for giving you this secret information. And we were told to, if we were so lucky to get a life reading, which is what he did, what he would put together like an hour-long audio tape that you would get to keep, and you were supposed to listen to it 200 times. And this would be your psychological roadmap of coming to understand who you are, what makes you tick, what are your proclivities, what are your flaws, what are the things you need to work on, and for a little cherry on top, he also would go through and mention some of your past life incarnations, what you had done, which was all part of it, and I just think it for me, when I met him, and when I think I got my life reading, I met him when I was 16, and then I think I got my life reading when I was maybe, 19, 20, maybe something like that,
Mm.
I would say. And I was still at university, and I remember listening to it, and it really helped me in quite a significant grasp, not only because it opened my mind to the possibilities of what could exist, but then I was in a group dynamic where everyone also felt the same way, and it just allowed us to kind of create kind of an alternative reality that put us in a position where we were just highly influenceable. Is if that a word, influenceable? I don't even know what that is, but
It'll do. Yeah.
yeah, and so I thought like this is because I was reading another book recently, and the author was actually talking about reporting on certain cults and that sort of thing, but then was also personally going through her own kind of spiritual journey, and she was deeply into psychics and astrology. And I thought, gosh, this is not really, even though I thought she did quite a competent job of reporting on the cult and what the issues were and why they were so dangerous, I could see her own personal journey of, being involved in using these kind of magical sources to guide her on her own personal trip became for me kind of problematic in the storytelling of saying, well, it was almost weakening her argument, the fact that she was putting such faith in these type of things that you just can't prove. And I think that's one of the fascinating things that I've learned, and certainly about my own cultic journey, is that if you can prove something in the science lab, people are not very interested. But if you say to them, "Oh no, this only works if you believe and if you have the faith," then people are like, "Oh, give me more of that. Tell me more. Tell me more." And so I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about how vulnerable we are, and it's why we love Harry Potter. It's why we love science fiction. There's all these sort of things, the possibilities out there that I think are fun to explore, but ultimately, if they become the basis that you start making some life decisions on, um, I'd consider giving pause to that approach, having been someone who went through what I went through. So I'd be
Mhm.
curious how you would define magical thinking and what kind of topics kind of fall under that umbrella.
Yeah, I, I think there's a very simple distinction, which is the things which are imaginary are magical. And I'm, you know, I got to, I think, through the work of Dennis Potter, The Singing Detective. Um,
I don't
Brilliant.
know.
It's
Yeah.
a brilliant series of six plays. Um, what would have been late 1980s, I think. It's
Okay.
one of the last things he did, and he was incredibly celebrated here. He was, a Cambridge graduate who came from a working class family, got a job in TV straight up coming out of university, wrote plays which were really deep and made you think. And they would come out on a Wednesday night, and I was a kid when he was first, and people would go home from the bar, from the pub. Working blokes would go home from the
Right.
bar to watch 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night a Dennis Potter play. So, and there were lots of them. Blue Remembered Hills was one of the other ones. The Beast with Two Backs. Um, he got into trouble over a play called Brimstone and Treacle that was made by the BBC, and then they didn't show it. And eventually, it became a musical. And Sting wrote the song "Wrapped Around My Finger" for that
Uh,
musical. And the idea is basically a 14-year-old girl who is disabled, seriously disabled. The devil comes and has sex with her, and it cures her. Now,
oh,
as it happens, Dennis Potter was a practicing Anglican Christian, and it was a thought experiment. It was like, well, what do we think about this? What do we make of this? But
right.
in The Singing Detective, he brings together, you start with a man who is Michael Gambon, who is the central character, and he's hospitalized with psoriasis. His skin is all flaking off, and he's in terrible pain. Now, this is a condition that Dennis Potter suffered throughout his life, and he was hospitalized nearly every year, I think, in this awful pain. It has arthritis that goes with it, and it's about this embittered guy and how furious he is with the world, and
Right.
about this cheap, tawdry novel that he wrote called The Singing Detective, which is set in World War II. And what happens is you have elements of his childhood. So you
Mhm.
go back to him as a little boy in the Forest of Dean, the wonderful Forest of Dean in England, and in World War II. And you have this corny novel in which Michael Gambon is the detective. So he has these two roles as the writer and as the detective. And then you have
Right.
this plot to get the rights to the novel away from him. And how much of it is in his imagination and how much of it is real, that's what becomes fascinating. That this overlap between the real world and the imagination is so beautifully played out in this drama. So, there are two spies who are following the detective in the novel, and they suddenly are in the hospital. He's living, and people keep bursting into song. The doctors will start, singing some 30s or 40s swing tune all together and all choreographed.
Right.
And it, for me, really was an entry into this. Oh, yes, we do live in the magical world. I'm told, and I'm not clever enough to have read it, but I'm told that Immanuel Kant said there is the real world outside, but we live in our interpretation of it, each of us as an individual. Now, Ron
Right.
Hubbard and Aleister Crowley wrongly had this idea that you have your own universe. No, you don't. A universe is a complete system of created things. You don't have your own. But we can only live in our interpretation of the universe. And what
Sure.
happens is that our interpretation of the universe can be more or less realistic. So if you see a black cat, you know, don't walk under ladders, don't break mirrors. There is a world of superstition and imagination, the idea of fairies, elves,
Right.
orcs, and Harry Potter, and all of this stuff. And we are all of us dipped in that world. We're all of us imagining things. And
Right.
so you were sold a bill of goods about reincarnation, about astrology,
Right.
about predictions of your future
Right.
coming from this man. And it's all imaginary. It's
Yeah.
all imaginary. If we look at astrology, there was a wonderful experiment where about 30 people got together and they were given their horoscopes. And they
Right.
were asked, how accurate is this? 28 of the thirty people said, yeah, that's me. Two of them said, not quite sure. So a tiny, 3% of the
Right.
people in the room, actually, sorry, 6.5% of the people in the room said, I'm not sure. But so many people, then they were told, we gave you all the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And then one
Fantastic.
bright spark in the audience said, hang on, whose horoscope is this? And the guy running the experiment said, I'm pleased that you asked that because, in fact, it's the horoscope of a serial killer who
Okay. Wow.
decapitated his grandmother, put her head on a hat box and threw darts at it. And so when it says in the horoscope that you'll soon have a career change, he is
Right.
hoping that the prison will let him work in the library.
Right.
And it's that willingness to believe. When you get into the system itself, as I understand it, is based upon the position of the stars at the time of Ptolemy in
Right.
the first century, not on the position they're in now. And the idea that the rocks of the universe, or the rocks of our solar
Right.
system, in fact, are determining how we behave, that there's some kind of magnetic force. I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me. But,
Yeah.
and before we started recording, I was talking about the book I'm writing,
Yeah.
which is called If Scientology Ruled the World. And it's a comparison, and Scientology is really going to love this. It's a comparison between L. Ron Hubbard's system and the occult Nazi system.
Wow.
Let's be sensational about this.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I have, for the last 40 years, I've read whatever I could find about Nazi occultism, and most of it is nonsense. Pauls
Right.
and Bergier, The Morning of the Magicians, it's a joke. Ravenscroft, The Spear of Leviathan, oh, come on. He says in the middle of it that he's taking information from the Akashic records, from the Lords of Karma. And it's like, look, could we have some documents? Could we have some witnesses?
Exactly.
But eventually, historians like particularly Nicholas Goodrick Clark, who was a professor, got hold of this and said, let's push all of this away. What did they actually believe? Because what they did will come out of what they believed. And astrology was massive in Germany through the end of the empire, the Kaiserdom, the Reich, into the
Right.
Weimar Republic, and then into the Nazis. They were really huge on astrology. And one of the funny comments is in 1941, Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer, the deputy leader of the Nazi Party, grabbed a plane and flew to Scotland. Just had this wild
Right.
thought that he would settle, get Britain out of the war. And that didn't really happen. Hitler was furious. Hitler didn't have the same kind of occult tendencies that Himmler and Hans Frank and so many people around him did. And he said, right, it's time to stop this. And it's
Mm.
called the Hess Action. And one of the things that's pointed out by a historian is that none of the astrologers and the various other necromancers and radiesthesiasts, people who do dowsing, none of them knew that they were going to be arrested by the SD. They all stayed home, they all got arrested, and they were sent to concentration camps. So their predictive abilities. I had a personal experience of this that I can't remember who it was. There were two psychics, one called Judy Heavenly and the other called Priscilla Astral, and they were great mates. I met one of them, and because the names are so great, I've forgotten which one it was. She was brought to my house by the head of Canada's Romany Council, a
Right.
wonderful eccentric man called Ron Lee, who's worth 5 books just for his incredible life, but we won't get into that. And he was totally into this, and she was predicting that my wife would become a successful author of children's books. It hasn't happened yet, but it was only 40 years ago, so it could happen any minute. She hasn't written any children's books or anything else, but maybe. And as we walked back to the railway station, I walked them back to the railway station. We got to a point where we had to cross a dual carriageway where the
Mhm.
cars were all going one way,
Right.
and she started getting worried, and she said, oh, she wanted to walk back up the hill to a crossing, a pelican crossing, with lights, so that
Right.
she could cross over. And I said, no, there'll be a gap in the traffic in the next couple of minutes, and there was, and you'll miss the train if you don't do this. And
Right.
I didn't understand why she was so upset with me. It was sort of
Right.
like, this is a woman. We then find out whichever one this was, one of them had done work for Reagan and the other had done work for Bush Senior. They were psychics, and their claim was that they'd worked with the president and the vice president, but they
Yeah.
couldn't tell what was going to happen in the next 2 minutes to the traffic. It's like, oh, come on, it's all pretense. There's no insight here.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I remember being told you just had to imagine, and that's such a great word to use now that
Mm.
we're talking about this, that
Well,
there's
there's
a
that
part.
that MAG in the middle of it.
That's right. That's right.
Magic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't think of that, but that you're right. And just imagine there's going to be a parking space, and if you think along those lines, it'll appear. Yeah, and and I think all these type of things are so engaging to. I guess I'm trying to think which part of our psyche it activates, but
The
it's a,
5-year-old part.
yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, it's the part that wants to believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and all those sort of things. And it's I think it's this part that wants to not have to take responsibility or accountability for the fact that life can be quite harsh and severe and challenging. And we want to believe there's some sort of magical way to alleviate those struggles. And that becomes very, very seductive, right? And then you have countless books out there that are clearly fiction, but they present themselves as nonfiction, right? I mean, that's, I think, one of the things, like, we find a book and we read it and we think, oh my God, this really is speaking to me. But it's just someone's idea about the way they're looking at the way things could be. And I think conspiracy theories fall into this as well, right? I mean, I know there was a time, certainly when I was involved in the cult, that I was reading exhaustively about conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories that I got exposed to. They would take little kernels of maybe a document here or a theory there, and they're kind of trying to connect the dots in some way. But the connecting of the dots is far more interesting than what we were told in our history books. And so it's like, well, which one am I going to buy into? Well, the conspiracy theory sounds a lot more exciting, and it also kind of exposes usually humanity in a really negative way of like, there's all these backroom deals, there's all these things, people conspiring behind the scenes to try to control it. And yeah, and I really remember having an epiphany at one point, thinking, if like one of the big conspiracy theories where they're like, I think I've heard there's like what, 9 or 10 or 12, families that are supposed to control the world, and they've all been doing this for eons. And and the truth that came to mind for me was, well, if that even if that was true, what could I do to stop it? Like the idea of getting informed about something that I actually have no control over affecting, what good was that actually doing for me other than getting me really razzled and really depressed and feeling like hopeless? Because under the guise of trying to get information, and I use that in quotes, the thing that was actually happening to me was I was becoming more paranoid and more kind of freaked out and more worried about things that I could not control.
Hmm.
And and I don't think that does any benefit to anyone's psyche. So I think that's the danger with these type of things. That they're incredibly intriguing and they're incredibly seductive, but they don't really hold a lot of water in the actual application of trying to make your way through the day. And I think that's, what I think is something that I think I love to address.
Yeah, and I think we should seek the truth. Um, and I don't know why I think that. I've thought it since I was about 14 years old, that even if it's unpleasant, I want to know what the truth is, because otherwise I am going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Otherwise I am going to be messed up. So yes, there are conspiracies. There are people who in secret get together
Mm.
to do things that are not for the good of humanity. They're for the good of, an example would be Facebook. If you
Right.
look at the founders of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is now, I think, the third wealthiest man in America.
Right.
Um, they sat down and they conspired to use psychological manipulation to get people to reveal private information about themselves. What that led to was that when Cambridge Analytica and Aggregate IQ, sister corporations, that Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca Mercer in, and they work with Steve Bannon, they work with
Right.
Donald Trump. These people conspired to take political control. Their first work was with Nelson Mandela.
Mhm.
They worked for the Obama campaign while they were
Mhm.
getting their chops together. But when it came to the Trump campaign, Brittany Kaiser, who sold Cambridge Analytica to Donald Trump, has written a wonderful book called Targeted, where she explains that 45,000 corporations had bought the data set created by Facebook.
Mhm.
And that meant that in the US, they had 5,000 data points, pieces of information about every individual of voting age. They knew five, and you go, but everybody's not on Facebook. And you go, yeah, but everybody talks about the people they know on Facebook. And by
Yeah.
using these things, now this has actually become illegal, but it shows there was a conspiracy. It was
Mhm.
behind closed doors. They didn't come out and say, hey, we're going to con you and rip you off. And
Right.
if you then look at the corporations, New Scientist about 15 years ago examined all of the corporate trails they could find, and they came to the conclusion that yes, there were probably just shy of 150 corporations that between them were battling for the control of industry, economics, and what have you. But there were that many. There wasn't, and there, of course, yeah, nations are trying to undercut other nations. You look at the CIA or the KGB, the FSB, the NKVD, the Cheka, whichever one. These groups are using criminal means to seek to influence other countries. You look at the hearts and minds propaganda campaigns that have been run. I've written about this in Opening Our Minds and the way that in the First World War, George Creel, the Ministry of Information in America, created this situation where after the war, the people who had worked in this then went into advertising. They took the same tricks. They then
Right.
went back into the
Right.
newspapers and they became agents or assets for what would ultimately become the CIA and the 16 other intelligence agencies in the United States. So
Right.
there are industrial, attempts to, you get weird stories like the idea that it was J.P. Morgan and the corporation around Morgan, and Morgan had been a Secretary of State in the US during World War One, dealing with
Right.
finance, and that this is one of my favorites, that somebody came along and found a machine that would break hemp down, a decorticating, something called something like that, that would break it down
Right.
and mean that you could use it to make paper.
Right. Right.
And Morgan had huge interests in the forests, which, and so you can see that, yeah, you might actually go, oh yeah, let's support a campaign to make cannabis illegal
Right.
so that you
Right.
can't grow these plants. And so these kind of things, yeah, they happen. There are scuzzy human beings who are doing whatever they can. But the idea that they're the Illuminati or that
Right.
they have descended from the heavens and are Markabians and are going to run everything, this is where things start getting paranoid and strange. I think there's a really essential idea about magical thinking that has completely penetrated our society so thoroughly that nobody thinks about it, or almost nobody, because I'm thinking about it. And that
Okay.
is the idea that you are divided within yourself. You are possessed with demons that are making you do things. You have an id that is making you have bestial urges. You have a superego that is making you do things. You have an unconscious mind, which is an agency that you're not aware of that's making you do things. These are all ways of evading responsibility. These are all ways of saying, well, the tooth fairy made me do it, or what have you.
Right.
Instead of
That's
going,
right.
look, it's me that drank the drink, so it's me that got drunk, so it's
Right.
me that did the act. I found a tremendous relief many years ago when I went, no, it's me. It's not because there's some secret agent inside me who's my enemy. It's
Yeah.
me. And
Yeah.
there isn't an unconscious mind. There are lots and lots of unconscious processes, but there's not a little thinking creature in there going, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to get you.
A little Rumpelstiltskin that works at night. Yeah.
Good old Rumpelstiltskin. I mean, there's a lovely Disney cartoon from the 30s where you've got on one shoulder the good angel, on the other the bad angel, and poor Pluto is caught between them,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh, that also happens in Animal House with John Belushi, I think. He's got a little angel and a little devil on the shoulder, trying to. Yeah, I mean, one of the points you raised that really struck me is you always want to find out what the truth is.
hmm,
And I think one of the challenges is like in this current society we're in is trying to find like well, how do you find the truth? Like where what information sources can you trust? Like it just doesn't seem to be that people are interested in the factual, nonpartisan, kind of just, by the book. This is the way things were. And I think that's where it gets challenging. Like, how do you really know what to trust as being a fact?
well,
What is really the actual accounting of what actually happened? I mean, you can make an argument that history is potentially affected by the fact that those who win can skew this telling of the stories based to make themselves look better, so to
that,
speak.
that was true until probably the 1940s. History is written by the victors, or as Voltaire
Right,
said, history is a Mississippi of lies.
right,
History is still skewed, but scientific history started coming along at pretty much the same time as scientific medicine. And it's modern, it's the 1940s. So that in medicine, you have to have a gold standard test, which is 1,000 people with a proper control group, at least two experiments by different people. So there are ways of finding an accurate interpretation, but it is very difficult. It sounds so easy testing 1,000 people,
right, right,
doing double blind, um,
right. Study,
double blind testing on that many people. But scientific history, there's a wonderful book called Denying History, which I happen to have here, which is
right,
by Michael Shermer and Alex Grobman. And I got it because I found myself talking to some Holocaust deniers, and
Right.
it really annoyed me because I went off and I spent 3 days looking through material. I read transcripts from the Nuremberg trials, and I
Right.
offered this material to these friends who were Holocaust deniers, and it made no difference. And
Mhm.
having spent 40 years talking to people who are fanatically convicted of
So when you
Scientology,
say it
particularly,
makes and we say it makes no difference, they just couldn't hear it. Like they were just
yeah,
like, no, yeah.
they were convinced that their source,
Mhm.
a hugely discredited source,
Right.
um, was correct, and that was that. And one of them pointed out to me that I should be calmer in talking about
Right.
this because it bloody annoyed me. My father was at the liberation of Belsen,
Right.
so there's a personal connect, and I saw what it did to him,
Right.
experiencing this. And I've seen A Painful Reminder, the documentary about that, which was not released because it was thought that the German people had already suffered enough.
Yeah.
So they didn't show them this horrific account. The guy who filmed it said, we were very careful to do pan shots to show that the heaps of bodies were real.
Right.
This was not an artifice. Um, but so I went away and found this book, which is Michael Shermer is a leading light of the Skeptical Society and a historian. And it gave me something I'd not expected. The first third of the book is not about Holocaust denial, it's about history and how
Mm.
history is made. And it takes on this question of can we have accurate history? And the point
Right.
is that when you've got hundreds of thousands of witnesses who have made statements, when you've got confessions by the people, the perpetrators.
Right.
So, for example, Rudolf Höss, who was the original camp commandant at Auschwitz, when he
Right.
was asked on the witness stand, so you executed 1.25 million people, his response was executed and exterminated.
Right.
When his deputy was quizzed, he gave the same answer. So, of course, the conspiracy theorist says, well, they were tortured. They were
Right.
forced to say these things. And in fact, Host he was claiming, 1.25 million. He hadn't killed that many people, but he had killed, probably over 500,000 people.
Right.
Kind of staggering. There is testimony, as I say, from hundreds of thousands of people. There is no event in history that has a better record. There's film, there are photographs. You can see what the Einsatzgruppen did as they went through Eastern Europe. Um, there's a film called Come and See about
Right.
Belarusia and what they did there, which is just one of the most horrifying things. That is a drama, but it's based upon real things. There is too much evidence to deny. If we go back to the Battle of Waterloo in
Right.
1815, there are three accounts. There's the French account, the Prussian account, and the English account. And I'm
Right.
afraid I come down with the Prussians. I think they won the battle, not Wellington. Oh dear. There are going to be people who are unsubscribing now, right? It's like, how dare you say that about the Duke of Wellington? I love the Duke of Wellington.
Right.
But so there is such a thing as scientific history, and there are ways of determining facts. I think the first thing, the founder of the British Society for Psychical Research and the
Mhm.
American Society for Psychical Research was William James, who was
Mhm.
also the founder of psychology. And he was a brilliant man. And there's a fascinating book called Ghost Hunters by Deborah Blum, which
Mhm.
talks about those societies and how they said, we want to find these things out. Mark Twain was a founder of the American Society too, because his brother had died when
Right.
they were racing steamboats, which they used to do. Um, and they did, I think, really good work. The father of critical thinking, Robert Thuless, who wrote Straight and Crooked Thinking in 1930, a brilliant book. And again, a real necessity, that book. The edition of it by his grandson, Christopher Thuless, is if if anyone's worried about how to think rationally, this is a
Yeah.
fantastic book. But Robert Thuless was, founder of critical thinking, was also a member of the Society for Psychical Research in the 1970s. So you can be a critical thinker and be curious about things that haven't been proven. When you apply the method to them, then you can determine whether something is or isn't true. So
Right.
the first investigation that the Society for Psychical Research, the British one, did was into Madame Blavatsky, the founder of
Uh,
Theosophy. And a guy went to India, explored her, and came back and said she's a total fraud. One of the things they'd found was she had this cabinet with little drawers in, and she'd
right.
pull a drawer out and it'd be empty. And then she'd pull it out again, there'd be something in it. And the guy went round the other side of the cabinet and said, yeah, there's a bloke the other side putting something in. Come on.
Right. Right.
Like, so that was an attempt to be rigorous. There were, Nobel laureates have been involved with this, all sorts of people. But James also gave us, I think, the most important of all principles. And this is what he called noesis, the feelings of knowing.
Oh, yes. Well, it's like the book on being certain, right?
Yeah. I've
Uh,
actually started reading another of Robert A. Burton's books just this day. And
yeah.
I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk to him. I have written to him and sort of said how
Oh,
much I
great.
admire him.
I'd love to hear that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, an incredible man, remarkable mind. Um, but exactly that. Why am I sure of that? And this, you've heard this story before. I tell this
Yeah.
story that when I was 17, this Bible basher spent 2 hours trying to, introduce me to Jesus, and I was polite but argumentative, which I hope remains my nature.
Yeah.
Um, and after 2 hours, he backed away from me. I mean, he backed away from me just in case I leapt on. I don't know why he felt he had to do that. And he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. So he
There
used the
you
word understand and the word know in the same sentence in conflict with each other. And I went, this is an important lesson. Do I really know? Do I know because I've experienced it? My mum used to tell this story about when she was a kid back in the 1920s, when she'd come home from school from town here in
go. Right.
Nottingham. She'd say to her dad, there were millions of people in the square today. And her dad would say, millions? And she'd say,
Mm.
there were thousands of people in the square today. And he'd say, thousands? He'd say, well, there were hundreds of people. And that being willing to be seeking to be accurate with our information. Then you
Right.
have, what's the source of my information? Is it some huckster who's added von into the
Right.
middle of his name so that he sounds like he's a German baron who's actually from Brooklyn, um, who is, an authority because, or is it somebody who actually got a university degree
Right.
and went on and got a
Exactly.
doctorate and did research? Now, that's no guarantee either, but it's a good starting point that somebody has authority, that if you want to have surgery, they are qualified as a surgeon. That's
Well,
quite useful.
exactly. Yeah. No. And it's interesting because it's going to get even more challenging going forward with the onslaught of AI, which can do these deep fakes, right? Where you can actually create a video of someone speaking words that they've never spoken, but the machine can mimic the voice and mimic the movement so to the unknowing eye, you think, oh, look, this person said this.
Hmm.
I've got them right here's the video. And it could be completely manufactured. And
Absolutely.
so it's going to get really, really challenging going forward. And I think um, you know, religions rely a lot on these magical thinkings, right? I mean,
Well,
it's like,
religion is magical thinking.
yeah,
What are we going to do with it? It's a cult. It's
yeah,
about supernaturalism, whether we
yeah,
like that or not. I left Buddhism. It took me about 40 years, but I left Buddhism 10 or 12 years ago because I'd
right,
long since gone to the point, well, I don't believe in anything supernatural anymore. I just don't
right.
believe. I don't see the need to believe in, reincarnation or heaven or demons or any of this. There's a God and a devil. I'm sure there must be, but why should I bother them? They don't bother me, in the words of the great Alvin Lee. Um, so it just slipped away. And then I'm kind of, well, I practice a kind of Buddhism that's, this reality and what have you. And I'm going, well, what's the point? I meditate and it
Right.
makes me feel better, but, you know, is that all, and somehow beyond that, beyond the supernaturalism of believing in bodhisattvas and, the Dalai Lama is the 14th
Right.
incarnation of Avalokiteshvara and took money from Keith Raniere and
Right.
from Om Shinrikyo, bless them.
Yeah.
It's none of it necessary. If there's an eternity, then I'm in it. Let's do
Yeah.
it. Let's not pitch it forward that if I'm a good boy, this will happen. Let's not
Right.
let's not do stuff because I think I'll be punished or I'll get a reward. Let's do
Right.
stuff because I seek to be a good person.
No, I
And
think those are all means of control, right? And
yeah,
that's what's been interesting for me because, I've investigated and used some of the plant medicines at times, right?
yeah,
And in that state, you're able to, they're the psychedelics, so you're hallucinating, you're seeing things that appear to your consciousness as being totally real, and you have these experiences and you have these sensations and you have these thoughts and these realizations. And one of the most powerful thoughts that comes forward to me is like, well, what's really real? Like this feels real. How, when I'm actually not under it, the influence of something like this, how real is that as well? And how do I know what's real and what's not? And which is a wonderful question, I think, that to investigate. And I find for me, what ends up becoming the most constructive is the only thing that really matters is what my perception is of what's real, in the sense that um, so much of the world, as I was saying earlier, are when I look at current events and things that are happening, yes, there's horrible things happening, there's wars and things, but can I directly affect them? No. But what's important for me is to contemplate, well, how do I feel about that war? In the sense, like, where do I fall on my the perception of what's happening, and would I do it differently, or does it upset me? And just go through that process of trying to figure out, well, what do I like about this? What do I not like about this? And it helps me build a kind of moral compass, for lack of a better description, because I have to be able to, we all want to say, oh, well, don't judge. But I think personally, for our own intellect, you have to use judgment to
oh,
try to,
Hitler, don't judge him. Don't judge
yeah,
him.
right,
He didn't
right.
mean any harm.
I think it's
Oh,
probably better not to vocalize all your judgments, but
mm.
for an internal
If you
mechanism,
want to stay married, yeah. But
yeah, yeah, right. I think you have
not true
to,
in my marriage, by the way. I am
yeah, of course not, no.
just in case Pamela's watching this.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I think it's a really important thing to say is like whatever we're experiencing is ultimately it's like looking at it like a school. Like rather than thinking the world needs to be different, so to speak, I've come to the place of saying that the world's exactly as it is supposed to be to teach me whatever it needs to teach me. And it's up to me to assess from my own personal point of view what that is, as far as like, oh, do I wish this was different than the way it is? And do I love the way that plays out? And from that, be able to map a certain kind of road where I'm saying, faced with a situation that kind of is based on these, my analysis of what I'm perceiving, I can now move forward in a way feeling like, to the best of my knowledge, this is how I want to behave in this situation. And whatever way it turns out will again inform me. So it's not about getting it right. It's not about having done it wrong. It's about continually taking in information and hopefully using that information to allow me to live a life that feels more consistent with what my beliefs are based on whatever my experience is. And it's not necessarily going to apply to anyone else other than me. And but that doesn't mean I can't find common roads with other people. But this idea that there's one way to do things and that what someone's doing is definitively wrong. I think that I think that we just live in a world where there's just a lot of shades of gray. And I certainly know from my experience with the cultic stuff that black and white thinking is so steeped in this magical thinking of where it's definitive. Like you just have to buy into this belief that this is the way it is, and there's no controversy and there's no arguments about that. And if you don't buy into that, then you are then somehow lesser than for not being able to just embrace it. And I'm like, I don't think that's the way it works.
No, no, and I agree with almost everything you say.
Yeah.
The only thing that I personally don't feel is that the universe is trying to teach me anything.
Mhm.
I'm
Okay.
trying I'm trying to
Okay.
learn, but I don't think there's any agency there.
Right.
Um, it's all going on. But what you say is true. That and it is about authenticity. As an artist, I'm a painter, I'm a musician, I'm a writer, poet, all of that nonsense. Um, and one of the things that I acquired early on was that there's a difference between an illustrator and a painter.
Hmm.
An illustrator is seeking to do something that expresses and explains things to people that people will like, that, all of these good things. It's all very, we thusly have the term commercial artist. Then you have
Right.
non-commercial artists, and that's where you are driven to determine your own preferences.
Mhm.
How do I want to do it? What am I looking for? Not will this sell, not will this make
Right.
this person happy, though you can do that as well. But you are if you look at Velázquez or um, Van Gogh, Gauguin,
Right.
anybody who's truly great,
Right.
um, then you're looking at somebody who is not like the others. As Picasso said, that, the museums are full of the failures. These are the people who didn't follow the rules. They're the people
Right.
who followed, and they became authentic. They expressed themselves. I think my goal is to grow up, is
Mm.
to become mature, is to become better, to constantly ameliorate, um,
Right.
and to become more myself.
Right.
Because I don't have any, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I don't have any sense of indwelling evil. I don't have any I do have a conscience. I do have remorse. I
Right.
I do not wish to exploit people. I do not have any hidden agenda. And
Right.
so I'm reasonably comfortable with myself because of that. But I wish to be authentic and useful and you know do something that's good in the world.
Right.
That pleases me. I also, I mean, I've said it often before, but it's great that we seek pleasure in the world. We should, like to eat chocolate because it's good for us. It needs to be at least 80% though, because sugar is
Yeah.
not good for us, but the chocolate's very good for us.
Right. Right.
Um, so we need pleasure and we need to look forward to having that cup of coffee, though I personally can't drink coffee much as I love it. Um, we need to look forward to things. But if you want to be happy, and my conversation with the abbot of a Zen monastery when I was 18, and he said, you mustn't pursue happiness. It's transitory. You never do that. You must, basically seek stoicism, be
Right.
able to deal with it. And I kind of went, okay, that's fine. Now, but as a person who is in fact happy, which doesn't mean that I don't have bad moments, and, that
Right.
can be every day. And it doesn't, I am very distressed by events in the world. But in my life and in my immediate relationships, my friendships, I'm happy. And
Right.
I'm happy, I'm sure, because I I get a feeling from doing something that helps people. So that
Right.
when people come to me, and thankfully they do, and say, you helped me to think about this in a different way and my
Right.
life is working better, that is a satisfaction that is permanent. I got this great letter this woman wrote to me. This is about 20 years ago. She said, 15 years ago, we spent an afternoon together and it changed my life. I was in a complete mess. And, I was the catalyst for what happened. I didn't change anything. She changed it.
Right.
But I've been happily married 15 years. I have kids. I have a career. And I attribute it to that afternoon. I've had, that was a particular favorite. You could,
Right.
that, you kind of go, yeah, well, I did something that helped somebody. And and that's a good thing. So, and coming back to the idea of we have our perception of the world, which is incredibly limited. Dogs, cats, and whales can hear much better than we can.
Right.
100 times better. We
Right.
have very
Right.
limited color perception.
Right.
Rattlesnakes have got infrared. Um,
Well,
they're creatures, bats have got sonar, but we do have this magnificent organ, this huge lump of fat that's in our
Right.
heads, that gives us imagination. It gives us this power that other creatures don't have. Very limited perception. Then we have our interpretation, much of which is actually determined by the time we're 5 years old. Much of what we
Oh, I didn't
feel and
realize.
how we
Is it
interpret,
really? I
because
didn't.
the
Wow.
basic foundation of the brain has occurred by the time you're 5. And
So what do they say when the brain doesn't stop developing until 25? I've read
yeah,
that somewhere too.
yeah,
Is that
it's not
accurate or
it's not in fact true. Um,
okay?
the, the the foundation of the brain is there
Right,
by the time you're 5, and yes, it continues to develop. There
right,
is the idea that it develops more rapidly in females than males,
right.
somewhere between age 21 and 25. But it was long thought until probably about 1990. It was
Mhm.
believed that that's it, the brain no longer develops. Then, I think, as a side effect of investigations into Prozac,
Oh,
selective
okay.
serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which does not work by bringing back serotonin. That's nobody's ever proved that, because it would happen immediately you took it if it was doing that, but it takes 3 or 4 weeks to work. What seems to be happening is it allows for neurogenesis in some people, particularly in the hippocampus,
Mm.
which is related to mood. So that if uh, on pathological observation of chronic depressives, they have a shrunken hippocampus, or
Oh, okay.
hippocampi, you've got two of them, in fact.
Right.
And it would seem that by swelling this, by fattening it up a bit, you feel happier. That neurogenesis is happening throughout life, right to
Mm.
the end. And neuroplasticity, where different parts of the brain take over from exhausted parts or parts that are no
Right,
longer functioning. Recovery after a stroke is
right,
partly neurogenesis, partly neuroplasticity. So that development is always happening. But the point is that the neural pathways, the
right,
foundation of them is there at about age 5. And a lot of, what disgusts you, what you like,
right.
is already there. All sorts of opinions that you'll have about the world. I think having plasticity, being able to change your mind, being able
Mm.
to say, "Oh, actually, I really quite like Japanese food." It,
Right,
you know, explore. We have this thing when you get old, you're meant to learn a language or a musical instrument. Well, this is
right,
about using this grey and white matter in your head.
right,
I think if you are a person who is curious, if you're a person who's always excited and interested in new things, rather than a
right,
person who just settles into habit, then you'll probably live longer. You'll probably
right,
have a better life. Um,
right,
but you'll also, by understanding that interpretation, when you talk about taking plants, taking
right,
psychedelics, hallucinogens, or whatever, they they take you to a different perspective.
right,
And for some people, that's very useful. For others, it's not. Um,
right.
but I think we fix our perspective. We become fixed in the way that we look at the world. And every now and then, it's a good idea to meet somebody who'll make you think, um,
Right,
or
right,
to perhaps ingest some substance that'll challenge your perception and
right.
show you that your perception is constructed. The way we
Exactly.
look at the world is we're making it up as we
Yeah.
go along, which is back to Kant and the idea that we each have our own interpretation of the world. And that's mood based. So
Mm.
some people are distressed and they look for distress in the world. Some people are anxious. They look something to put their anxiety upon. Often there's good reason to be anxious in this world. But
Sure.
some people seem to be fundamentally cheerful and
Right.
they experience the world in that way. My recommendation, my essential recommendation, would be to read Jiangsu, or among the classical scholars, Epictetus,
Yeah.
or maybe Derren Brown's book Happy, which is based upon Epictetus, which is to say it is possible to be stoic, to deal with the world and what happens to you and the awful things, but also to be Epicurean, to take pleasure in the world and seek to give others pleasure. For me, that philosophy is a successful way of living. None of the others are. They all lead to tragedy and confusion. But doing the best we can, being happy with what we have to be happy with,
Right.
to a line from Adrian Belew of King Crimson, um, is a way forward. And really checking things, really going, am I believing this because I want to believe it? Or,
Yeah.
is there reason enough here? I mean, at some point, I long to do an analysis of a book called A First Rate Madness by
Mm.
Nasir Gamey, who has all of the qualifications. He's a psychiatrist. He's at Harvard Med School. He's a professor at Tufts. He runs a mood disorders clinic. He's got a degree in
Right.
history. You're going, wow, he's got all the qualifications. And he's written this completely idiotic book, which has been called a masterpiece. Been a bestseller, where he's suggesting that madness leads to better decisions in crisis.
Oh,
And one of his
wow.
examples, I'll only give one, is William Tecumseh Sherman,
Mm.
and who won, according to him, who won the Civil War. I think the Civil War is still waging because of William Tecumseh Sherman, because he burned Savannah and Atlanta. I
Right.
think that division is still going on in the elections that are going to happen on the 5th of November. So I don't think he was a successful leader. I think he was a murdering bastard.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's another
Well,
conversation. I think
yeah.
we're,
I mean, one of the things you brought up, which I'm thinking about now, I think what we call authenticity with someone,
yeah,
like what is that quality? Um, and to me, I think it's very tied to someone who has done the work to take accountability for their actions, so to speak. Like that, I think when
yeah,
you go through the process of having the humility to admit that there's things you've done that you're maybe less than thrilled about what you've done, and but taking the accountability of realizing that yes, I did that, but it did teach me something.
mm,
So that's a certain grounded quality that I think we kind of relate to that authenticity, so to
mm,
speak. And I think that can be a very powerful effect on someone else because the magical thinking kind of falls into this area of I'm giving away my responsibility because I just don't know what's going to happen, and whatever's going to happen is going to be for my benefit, and all these sort of things, and it's very seductive. In this way, it can come across in a very charismatic way of
mm,
like anything's possible and all these sort of things. But there's a grounded quality to the authenticity of just saying, well, the only thing I really do know is what has happened, and I'm tend to take accountability for what happened.
mm,
Good, bad, and everything in between. It's hard to even label it that way, because, like I said, I think I really have discovered in life it's not so much about right or wrong. It's like doing the best you can with whatever you know at the time, and we're all just a work in progress. And I
mm,
find that helps me have a more kind of for me personally, an accurate perception of what my life is and what it has been,
yeah,
and that doesn't mean I don't consider things down the road that I can then, taking in new information, go, actually, the way I looked at what happened back then, there's another way of looking at it because with this new information, I can look at it differently now.
mm,
But I think it is that process of having the humility. We've talked about this a lot, the humility to admit that you just got things wrong occasionally here and there, that you made mistakes, and but they're ultimately lessons, and that it's not about getting it right. It's not about that there's some formula to success where, like you were talking about, where you're going to have a forever state of happiness. I think that mood swing and all those sort of things that happen to us come from having the humility to be okay with knowing, like, listen, it's not always going to work out every time.
mm,
And but whatever does happen will ultimately inform me and give me an opportunity to possibly be a better version of myself today than I was yesterday. So let me just continue down the road of learning. And I
yeah,
think that's really when you meet someone who's kind of more in that mindset, it is a very impactful thing to experience because so and I certainly am guilty of this in the past. So many of us are kind of running, chasing our tail, based on this magical thinking oh, if we do this, this, and this, then it's just going to magically come together and everything will make sense. And I don't think it really is about it all making sense. I think the wonder of life is knowing that a lot of things we just don't know and we'll probably never know.
Hmm.
But that's the excitement and that's the fun and that's kind of the roller coaster, which is a lot better than just being the flat line. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and you're right. Um, and beware people who have fervent certainty.
Yes,
Beware the people who come along and say, "I know how it works."
exactly.
Uranus is in Venus, or you're in
Right,
the wrong
right.
planetary house. Because of the book I'm writing, I've had to read a lot of Aleister Crowley, and I don't recommend it to anybody.
Yeah,
And seeing his incredible arrogance, his incredible self-satisfaction, that the world definitely revolved around him. And you kind of go,
mm,
yeah, but by the time you died, a lot of your followers had committed suicide, and you were a junkie, and
right.
you inspired Ron Hubbard, and that's not a good thing. But I can read a whole page of this thing as a point where he says, was it ax squared plus bx plus x equals zero. And if it does not equal zero, it is not an equation. There's no explanation of what the terms in his equation mean. And he's just, see, there you go. This, the confidence with which people who have a screw loose will exert
Right,
themselves. Beware confidence, beware certainty. Confidence and confidence tricks go
right,
together.
right.
And go
Yeah,
away and think about it for yourself. Talk about it with your friends. Talk about it with with other people. Find different opinions rather
right.
than being dropped into a rut that says we are the Aryan race and we have to destroy the
Yeah,
rest of humanity. Madame Blavatsky, by the way, reckoned that Jews were Aryans too. It gets very confusing what we're meant to believe.
right.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, magical thinking. And just a final point on the tooth fairy. Of course,
Yes,
South Park has proved that the
right.
tooth fairy is actually Eric Cartman. So there is,
Oh, there you have that. So at least we have that solved. Okay,
yeah,
we can check the
yeah.
box.
We'll get to the Easter Bunny next time we
Yeah,
talk.
exactly. But I always enjoy our talks,
Me too.
John.
It's such great fun to talk with an intelligent human
Yeah,
being. Really
it's
is.
really, really fun. And yeah, I mean, listen, I'm in the business of creating fiction with, and making movies and telling stories. So I love that aspect of it. But, it's just, I think it's important to try to find the balance in how do we root ourselves in our decision-making process and where are we vulnerable to give our power away to people, like you're saying, who speak in such realms of confidence when it's really should be thought of in a way of like, maybe I should question.
Bullshit.
Yes, maybe I should be a little more skeptical because,
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, I think that assuredness is a telltale that maybe there might be some deception
Mm.
at afoot, so to
Or
speak.
desperation. When
Yeah,
I noticed with born again Christians, and I've got nothing against Christianity. It's
right,
properly lived. It's a fine system. Where people are genuinely good. They've
right,
genuinely given all that they have to the poor, just as Jesus said. When they're doing that stuff, then it's a noble thing. And I have friends who are Christians who've done splendid things in the world. But
right.
I think I have come to believe that if there is a journey in life, then it's the journey to becoming your own guru
Yeah, I
towards,
I would
not
concur.
having to follow anymore. And that,
Yeah,
and I don't feel like it anymore. I don't feel like
yeah.
somebody's going to give me some truth that's going to magically change my life. I have become human. I have become vulnerable. And as we've said it today and we've said it often enough before, humility is the
Yeah.
fundamental characteristic. And I've looked the word up. I have some idea of what it means. One day
Well,
I'm hoping to practice it.
that's good. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's great.
Not yet.
I think that's a great place to stop. That's great.
Great. Thank you so much,
Embrace
Hoyt.
humility. Okay. Well, until the next time, my friend,
Yep.
you take care. Stay warm over there on the other side of the pond.
Yeah,
You
the
know?
freezing side of the pond. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Well, good.
whereas you there in LA, where it's, as Bill Hicks said, hot and sunny.
There we are. There it is. That's a good
Great.
American accent. You can do this. Yeah, well done.
I work at it, years of practice.
Good
Okay,
stuff.
thanks so much. And thanks to
Please do.
everybody for watching. And please do write some nice comments. And if you like Donald Trump, oh, I don't know what to say. You know, I talked about Trump maniacs and people saying, "Oh, that's just Hulk Hogan said that." I said, "Yeah, he said it at the Republican bloody conference, and everybody applauded, including Donald Trump." If you're not a Trump maniac, if you've worked out a rationale, a reason for voting for Donald Trump, you're fine. But if you are a
Yeah.
Trump maniac, watch out. Mania is
Right.
not a healthy condition. But still, I'm putting Donald Trump into everything at the moment, and
Okay.
should we now play 39 minutes of Ave Maria in different versions, along
There
with
we go.
Nothing Compares to
Exactly.
You, and I will.
Everything's back into balance. There we are.
Well, it's probably going to cut that bit out, but never mind. Thanks a lot, Hoyt.
All right. Cheers.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.